This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information through honest conversations on fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond by bridging together the two worlds of allopathic medicine and holistic practices to improve the reproductive health outcomes of women. I am your host, Keely Semler. Hi there, welcome back to the Motherlands podcast. You are about to hear the final episode of the year before Motherlands takes a hiatus. It feels fitting to share this intimate conversation with my mother, especially as we begin to slow down for the winter season. We do talk about some pretty heavy things, so I want to preface this episode with a warning as we discuss grief, loss, and death. The overarching theme of our conversation is about reflecting on our experience as caregivers for my late brother, Derek. There are a couple of moments where we are overcome by emotion, and I decided to keep those bits in this episode because it feels important to share honest, tender, and raw moments, especially the ones that have shaped me. This is essentially an origin story told firsthand by a mother and daughter. I have had clients over the years ask me what led me to become a doula, and this conversation pretty much sums it all up in one place. Recently, I stumbled upon a quote that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was shared online by my client Jackie, who also recently came on the podcast as a guest. The quote says, "You will lose everything: your money, your power, your fame, your success, perhaps even your memories. Your looks will go, loved ones will die, your body will fall apart. Everything that seems permanent is impermanent and will be smashed. Experience will gradually, or not so gradually, strip away everything that it can strip away. Waking up means facing this reality with open eyes and no longer turning away. But right now, we stand on holy and sacred ground, for that which will be lost has not yet been lost, and realizing this is the key to unspeakable joy. Whoever or whatever is in your life right now has not yet been taken away from you. This may sound trivial, obvious, like nothing, but really, it is the key to everything, the why and how and wherefore of existence. Impermanence has already rendered everything and everyone around you so deeply holy and significant and worthy of your heartbreaking gratitude. Loss has already transfigured your life into an altar." This quote really hits home for me. It is our loss that binds us together and transforms us as human beings. If you have experienced a loss of a loved one, I hope you find a little bit of peace and comfort in this conversation. Thank you again for being here and tuning in. Your presence is very much felt and deeply appreciated. On another note, beginning in the new year, I'm offering my support to clients seeking birth and postpartum preparation through personalized one-on-one support. Additionally, I have 2 spots available to support new doulas through my mentorship program, which is modeled after a traditional apprenticeship. We work together closely for 6 months, where you gain confidence and direct experience supporting clients. To learn more about these offerings, please send me an email, hello@keelysemler.com, or visit my website. And finally, something new is coming, and I am very excited to share more with you all very soon. But for now, please visit our website, wearemotherlands.com, to sign up for our newsletter. Wishing you a restorative holiday season, and I'll see you again soon. Well, what should we talk about?
Oh, that is so not fair. Fair.
I'm kidding. I feel like there's so many things that we could talk about that people would resonate with. Maybe you could start by talking about when you were a young mom and you started to notice that your son, my brother, Derek, had some sort of problem, health issue.
Mm-hmm. You know, it took me a long time to make up my mind that there was something off.
What do you mean by that?
The way he moved. I knew there was something going on with the way he moved. And it took me a while because he was such a goofball. So if he didn't keep up with everybody, then it was because he got distracted by a spider web or something like that. He was always distracted. He always saw the little tiny things, you know?
Mm-hmm. And how old was he?
The first time I noticed that something was off was when he was 3 years old. His feet were very flat, super flat. And the pediatrician said, you know what? I'm not even going to look at his feet until he's 5. So I was like, oh, okay.
And that was probably the first of many times where a doctor maybe dismissed your concerns, or did you feel like, you had it?
There were a couple instances because we did see a bunch of doctors. I'm still trying to figure out how old he was when we noticed this. Must have been like kindergarten or first grade. He just could not keep up with the other kids. There's just no way. He couldn't keep up.
Like running around and playing.
Like running around, right. But it took me a long time to realize there was something off because, like I said, he had ADHD. So the smallest little thing would distract him. He couldn't keep up with kids, and I couldn't quite put my finger on something was wrong.
Did anyone say anything to you that noticed it as well, or was it just you?
I feel like Aunt Chris noticed that his gait was off. I think somebody asked him, oh, did he hurt his leg? I did not see that, to be honest with you. It just was a general, maybe a weakness that I saw. And the pediatrician didn't really see anything. I went and saw a neurologist at Lutheran, and it was a woman, and she was lovely. I said, look, if he's just clumsy, then he's just clumsy. It's no big deal. But if it's something else, I want to, be able to address it as quickly as possible. And so she spent well over an hour with him, and she did all of the tests. And she said, I don't know what it is, but you're right. There is something that's not right. And so she sent me to another neurologist, and he spent maybe 10 minutes with him. And he's like, oh, I know what it is. It's this. He sat down and he picked up the phone and said, okay, so now I want to schedule a biopsy, without even talking to us about what that entailed. And so we asked him, what does that mean? And he said, well, they go in the leg and they take about a 4-inch slice of muscle away and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait a minute, we have to think about this. And that's when he said, well, the good news is that they live pretty long with this. And I was devastated.
Because that was the first time someone actually brought to your attention like a life expectancy situation.
Right. Which is not something that I had thought about at all. It was terrible.
The condition that doctor said he had, did it turn out he had that?
No, it turned out he was wrong. He tells us it's bad. And the first thing I said to your father is, I want a second opinion.
How did you know you wanted a second opinion? Because you felt like it was such a serious situation now, and you're like, you need just enough.
It was not only serious, but he only spent 10 minutes with him.
Yeah.
So how do you diagnose in 10 minutes all the different neurological disorders?
There's no way you can.
No. And I said, you can't sit here and give us this news and not let us think about what this means. And he's like, okay, well, when you're ready, call me back and we'll do it. Well, that wasn't going to happen. He was a jerk. Very cold. Okay. So from there, I actually went next door to some neighbors. One of them is a genetic counselor and the other one is a pediatrician. And I asked them, I said, if you needed a second opinion, where would you go? And they said, I would go to Children's Memorial in Chicago, which actually no longer exists. It's now a new hospital. She said because of the volume, they just get a volume of children through there and they have more experience. And so we did go. We had a great doctor. Everything seemed to be going well. And then he started to lose his balance. And At that point, the doctor really said, you know what? I don't know what this is. The symptoms are the same with another muscular dystrophy disease, but it was not that one because there's no imbalance in that one. I wonder if you shouldn't go to Mayo to see if you can get a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So we didn't go to Mayo, but we did go to Rush. Long story short, we ended up with the head of pediatric neurology, and he did a wonderful exam on him and he nailed it. I mean, he knew right away what it was. And at that point, it was pretty rare. So we went down and had a whole bunch of blood taken because they just were able to identify it through, taking blood. It was such a new blood test that they had to look up how many vials of blood to take. So that's how we got him diagnosed.
And how old was he?
I feel like he might have been in second grade at that point where he got a full diagnosis.
So would you say it had taken a couple of years to get the right prognosis?
Yes.
Prognosis and diagnosis, or just diagnosis?
Just a diagnosis. The prognosis is another element to it as well. But for diagnosis, it did take a couple of years. He developed the imbalance, and that put it in a different category, which was super interesting. But it absolutely took a couple of years. And it was kind of a relief to finally get a diagnosis.
Because then there was a direction.
And then you can prepare so that there aren't any big surprises along the way. Even though this was fast, it really wasn't that fast. So you still had time to prepare for what was coming. And then there was a dilemma. One of the questions that we had to answer was, would we have you tested as well? That was a tricky one. And it's something that we sat on for a little while, but I have to give it to this doctor. When he said, you can choose to have your daughter tested too, but just understand that it would only be for knowledge's sake. There's no medication, there's no therapy, there's no anything that would change it.
For listeners, his disease was genetic, and so
50% chance that you carried it, 25% that you had it, and 25% that you didn't have it. And you were older. So we chose not to have you tested because if you did test positive and not showing any symptoms or anything, all it would have done is made you worry. The doctor really was more concerned about you, I think, at that point.
How did you get over the idea of how unfair this was for you and for your child? Can you talk about that? Or did you feel that way? Did you have any moments of like, why me? This is such a rare genetic disease. What are the odds that this could happen? This is so unfair. At what point, if ever, did you maybe start to look at it a different way?
I gotta say, I didn't really feel like it was why me and be angry. I didn't really feel like that. I feel like maybe I was just too busy to go there. My mind was more of not why me, but more of how am I going to do this? Like, how do we take care of him? The anger part came later, and the way that he was treated and the things that he had to go through. I don't know if I ever really mourned the fact that that happened, that I was given a shit card. I just think that I was so preoccupied on trying to be a single mom with two kids, and one of them's handicapped. I mean, most of what I was hoping is that I could do it. I'll tell you what it was. It wasn't anger. It was very lonely. I didn't really know anyone who was going through. I felt like I was doing it by myself.
Yeah, you were in survival mode.
Absolutely. And I see parents with handicapped kids, and I know they're trying to figure out how to make the best life for their child. It's that simple. When I think back to that time, I remember I was always afraid.
Afraid of like the shoe to drop, or afraid of like the unknown of what was coming next, all of it?
All of it. And you're always watching to see if there is a medical issue. But I think one of my biggest fears was that I wouldn't be able to take care of him, that things would progress to where I wouldn't be able to do it by myself.
You also resourced yourself, and there were people like that came and helped, Derek from time to time, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, it really did fall on your shoulders, and that must have felt really daunting to be like, what was going to happen when he is an adult,
Or it is when things changed, would we be able to figure out a solution? The whole thing about not being able to give him a shower, it was so hard for me to get him in and out.
Because he was tall and big.
Yes. I mean, we figured that out, which I was really grateful for. And we had some amazing women come and help us. But there were little things that I think I worried about all the time that were changing. So his life was not going to be the same as it was before. One of them was eating issues.
Like diet.
I was always measuring like fluid intake and what were in foods. Like he couldn't have very much salt in his food. So we were always on the hunt for foods that didn't have much salt in them. But the little things that I just wanted to keep his life as normal as possible. So I was always afraid that something would come up and I would not be able to know. I wouldn't know what to do. And I wouldn't be able to take care of it.
And did that ever happen?
It didn't. I used to laugh and say that prayer was so much a part of my life at that point. But literally my prayer was to take away the fear so that I could think clearly and give him the best that I was able to give him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always about taking away that fear because it stops you from being creative. It stops you from literally being able to really focus on a problem or an issue and try to find a solution.
My God, that's so relatable, I think, for every mom,
Yes.
But particularly moms that have children with special needs, for sure.
Right. Because I think that, we're all creative. We can figure out different creative ways to do things, right, that aren't exactly the way that we normally do them, but it makes it pretty darn normal. But if you're afraid, it clogs up your head, it clogs up your heart, it just clogs up your creativity, and you can't think clearly in order to find that solution. So I do remember how much fear I felt for years, and it was all the time.
Did you have people to talk to about your fears?
Not really. I mean, I was supposed to be the strong one. So you can't really be like, oh my God, I'm a disaster. I don't know. I feel like I needed to be strong.
Even when you didn't feel like you could be, you felt like you had to be. Mm-hmm.
Right. And not letting people know.
And do you think anyone thought you were weak? Hell no. I'm going to answer that for you.
Maybe not, but I also could hide it really well. I mean, I remember being terrified and having to be strong. And like the time that Derek, fell over in his wheelchair. Mm-hmm. Here he is on the ground, and I see him on the ground, and I'm driving, and I stop my car and I run over there. But I didn't run over there hysterical. I ran over there and kind of looked at him and said, well, bud, what are you doing?
How you doing?
When inside, I was just like freaking out.
That seems like it's such a skill that parents have to have, like a mother has to have to like keep her cool, because if you are freaking out, then that absolutely would have freaked him out.
Oh, absolutely. And that's for any mom, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
Approach it calmly, because they think you know what you're doing, even though you have no freaking clue. None whatsoever. Later, I was angry with how people treated him as a, disabled, handicapped person. I think that he was very dismissed. People were rude, literally talking over him. And at one point, and this was kind of funny. So he was in a doctor's office. His disease at that point was not very well known.
And it was physical, not intellectual.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. He was sharp as a whip. But I kicked a bunch of doctors out. I think they were med students. I don't know who they were, but I kicked them out of the room because they were talking about him and around him, and he was sitting right there. And I said, you have to go. He's right here. Don't talk around him. Ask him. This is why you're in this room. And they were rude, and I told them to leave.
Like he's a specimen, and they're
He
just
was. Yes.
yeah.
Was. And I know that, again, they just kind of diagnosed this type of, and it's not even considered muscular dystrophy anymore, but this type of, at the time, muscular dystrophy. So it was rare, and a lot of people hadn't seen it, or it was misdiagnosed for something else. But yeah, the rudeness was what was so crushing.
Well, I remember even being like in the supermarket and people would like cut across him or like,
Yes.
or just like intensely stare. And I would say that that's probably still true now. Like, I think seeing a child with disabilities really disturbs people. And well, there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, in our society with how to not only accept people with disabilities and children with disabilities, but make them feel more welcome.
I think there are people who just don't know what to do.
For sure.
I also think that there are people who have no time for anybody who is handicapped. That's the times that I got angry.
Will you share about traveling with Derek and about your experience with that very famous organization that paid for Derek and us to go to Italy?
It was amazing. We were contacted, and I think it was your grandma who put our name in for Make-A-Wish Foundation. They were lovely.
Just to preface this for listeners, Make-A-Wish is a foundation that grants children with terminal illnesses a wish. So my brother...
Or chronic illness,
Chronic and terminal?
Yes, both. Mm-hmm.
So Derek's wish was to go to Italy to eat Italian food because that was his favorite.
Yes. The trip itself was very challenging. We were fortunate enough that we had a nurse come with us. Derek had a nurse that would come in and take blood to monitor the different medications he was on. And so she was actually able to come with us, which was lovely. I don't think I could have done it on my own. And we did go to Italy, and we did go to Rome and Florence. I am not sure what it's like there now, but Rome was the most unfriendly place for a handicapped person that I could imagine. First of all, to navigate Rome in a wheelchair is very challenging because they have such high curbs, but we did it. I mean, we had to lift him every curb, which was, amazing. But the people there, and I can't say that they are actual residents of Rome, but the people there were beyond rude. They would get upset if we walked too slow. Sometimes they actually would step over his feet, which was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. They would look at him like he was a monster. He knew this. That was the hardest part, is that he knew. I remember we were at the Coliseum. That worked out pretty good, but then we were going to go next door, and the guy looked and said, "Oh, you can't go." And I said, "Well, wait, can we just talk about this?" He said, "No, there's no talking. You're not going." And I remember walking back just being devastated.
Yeah.
All of us were devastated.
It was devastating because we realized that that is a country that at the time, again, I haven't been back since. So
I am not either.
It made a lasting impression on all of us. And I think that's why I haven't been back since. But what I remember is talking to people and them saying, this is a country that will not make accessibility easier in order to allow for more people. This is a country that will prioritize history over anything else. So what that means is there's a lot of stairs. There are no elevators. There's no real accessibility for people with special needs unless they're being carried. And as like three women, well, you,
Yes.
Derek's nurse, and me, how old was I? I think I was like 14 at the time. So three women trying to carry a young man through these ancient ruins and artifacts. It was really challenging and also crushing to hear like, oh yeah, no, you can't go. You can't go there.
There was no discussion. He looked at Derek and said, you can't go.
That was the first time I guess I realized as a young person, like so many places all over the world are completely inaccessible for someone with special needs. And coming from the US, where it is a law that things need to be accessible to all bodies, it was, very eye-opening. And I would say that a lot of European countries and other places in the world are similar. They're not going to compromise their history for accessibility. And that was a rude awakening.
Right. I don't know where they stand now. It would be interesting to find out how that has changed. But
do you remember we talked to someone there? I think she was our waitress, and we went in, was it 2004? This waitress, she said something along the lines like, yeah, Italy's progressing, like Italy is progressive. You know, in the last 10 years, we've started allowing children with disabilities to go to school. Like they weren't even allowed to go to normal school.
But you did not see handicapped people in the city unless they were begging. So I asked her, I said, I know there are handicapped people. Where are your handicapped people? And she said, well, they stay at home. And I said, well, what about school? And she said, oh, well, they just, the last 2 years, I think it was 2 years, they had allowed handicapped kids to go to school. This was a complete shock to us coming from the US. And it took me talking to somebody for them to say, you know, I get it. They're just behind because we had to pass laws for this to happen. It didn't happen out of the goodness of our hearts. It happened because people passed laws in the US. They just haven't done that in Italy. And maybe they have because we're looking at, 20 years ago. Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about the loneliness and the alienation of having a child with special needs. How did you find community?
I think you're kind of isolated unless you have friends or you have organizations that have things that you can participate in. But we're talking a long time ago, so there weren't as many things for Derek to do. So it really was with neighbors and friends, really, and family, because you're kind of stuck in, how you go about your traveling and being in people's homes or being in organizational homes. So I think you're stuck at home for a lot of it. So having kids over, or sometimes Derek would go to other kids' homes, but they're not prepared for a handicapped kid. You know what I mean? So that independence of, a kid saying, oh, hi, I'm going to, Joey's house. And I say, come back in 2 hours. That just didn't happen with Derek. Yeah, that was tough. Now I feel like it's much better. There's more organizations. There's more things. When Derek got into high school, there were activities that he could do, which I think was great. But when you're like in junior high or grade school, there just isn't. There's not a lot of things that they can do. So it's friends. It's going down the block. It's just doing with the neighbor boys.
I feel like 20 years ago, it was such a journey to figure out what was available. And it was just like talking to his teachers and his nurses and his aides to figure out what services were available at the time. Can you talk about the story of getting the beast?
Oh my gosh.
First of all, what is the beast? It was like a GMC, right?
It was a GMC giant van. It was very old, but it did have a chairlift on it. This mechanical thing. You open the door, you push a button, and it kind of lowers down, and then it lowers to the ground. And
so it made it easier for him to get in a wheelchair.
Right. So one of the things that was so tough is that he did have a stroke. And after his stroke, it was very hard for him to stand up. So I personally could not lift him up and put him in the car. we were 100% stuck at home. So I called muscular dystrophy and got a hold of somebody. And I said, look, is there, do you guys have any vans, or do people donate vans, or, I'm stuck at home. And she was so sad. She's like, I'm so sorry. We don't do that. There's too much liability. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So I hung up, and she literally called back 20 minutes later and said, you are not going to believe this, but I had a family call in and say they got a new van and they want to donate their old van. And I said, could you please give them my number? Well, holy cow, we got the green beast. And we had to go through an organization. So a friend of mine, her husband is very involved in the Moose organization. And so they sponsored us. And
what's the Moose?
It's kind of like the Elk Club. It's a family organization is what it is. We went through them and we were able to get it. And then they were lovely, and they had the brakes checked on it and kind of went over it so that it was safe. And so we got the green beast, and we're talking a huge van, so big that I could fully stand up in it. So could you. Do you remember?
That van used to make me so sick because the brakes were so bad. And
yeah, the brakes were very sticky.
You felt like you were in a boat.
It had a couch that could fold out into a bed. And no, we did not use that. Yeah.
But how amazing that we got to have that for free.
Unbelievable. And I could not afford to go and buy a van because they're very, very expensive. And it just was kind of made to, be. I also remember picking up his friends and going out to dinner, and his friends, the school he went to had a fabulous program for the physically handicapped. So his friends all had different disabilities, and we would just load them up in the van and off we go for dinner and do nothing but laugh.
What were you driving before the beast, and how did that work?
I feel like it was a minivan.
So that required taking Derek out of his wheelchair and then transferring him into the minivan, which got harder as he got older because he was taller than you and bigger than you.
And I kept the minivan, but we had the beast on the driveway, and that thing was so heavy that it left divots in the asphalt in the driveway. I know. Yeah, it was an incredible time. Yeah. So after Derek passed, I did pass it on. So a friend of mine knew somebody with an older son who lived in a group home, physically handicapped. They had no way to get him or his buddies anywhere. So I sold it to my friend for $1 just to make it all very legal, because I didn't need the write-off. And honestly, I don't even know how much that would be worth anymore. And it was donated to this family, and they kept it at the home.
Can you talk about the really harsh reality that parents of children with special needs go through when their child ages out of the education system? Because I know this was something we were right on the precipice of doing with Derek, but he passed away right before graduating, although it's worth sharing that they did actually graduate him, which is awesome. But what is the reality for parents with special needs when their child ages out of the system?
I am not fully up on all of this now, but when you age out, there really is nothing unless you can pay for it. So you will see kids in high school that are older. They're up to 21 because they still can go to school. They can still learn. They still have a social life. But at that point, back then, if you age out, you're basically at home, unless you have that money to send them to different programs. There are grants or things out there that you can get to do that. But Derek had a very good friend, and he aged out and he was stuck at home.
Yeah, in this tiny apartment.
And we used to go over there and walk with him. Single mom, she worked. He was at home. He had different people come in and check on him. But boy, that's a tough one, especially if you have somebody who can't get around. Now you're stuck. You're all stuck, because to have care come in is really tough. So that was then.
It probably depends on states too.
And then for these families, I think, which is hard, is that once they reach a certain age, used to be, maybe it still is 18, you can apply for Social Security and get Social Security benefits for them. And it's that money that you would use to try to get them into programs as much as you could. Having a handicapped family member is very, very, very expensive. I mean, we're talking doctors, we're talking medical equipment, wheelchairs, braces. I mean, all of that is super expensive. Muscular dystrophy has a wonderful program that helped us pay for a lot of it, but it's a fortune.
I want to go back to talking about the medical side of managing and taking care of a child with special needs. Can you talk about like doctors and taking things for face value? Like, I find when I'm supporting clients, new moms getting ready to give birth, part of it is like, you don't know what you don't know. And there's a skill here in learning how to ask the right questions so that you can make the right choices. But like, it's not a doctor's job to tell you what questions to ask, or how to know how to advocate for yourself. So it really is on you as a parent or on a person, if it's their own health, to learn how to self-advocate. So can you talk about, your journey in working with doctors and not taking everything they said at face value?
It's so funny because I am from the school of whatever a doctor says, you follow. That changed. And I think for parents, it absolutely changes when it's your kid. And then you do have questions and you want answers. And the answers really have to kind of satisfy you. And following your gut is crucial. So if you don't like a doctor, then you get a different one. And if you love a doctor, then you do everything you can to keep that doctor.
Can you talk about what makes a good doctor?
What makes a good doctor is somebody who is going to listen to me. And I know that doctors deal with all kinds of people. I know they do. And some of them are together and some of them are not. But for me, when I tell you something, I mean it. And I want you to listen to me. And I want you to work with me and help me figure out how to take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
And there were doctors who didn't want to do that.
You need proper safety net of support from the provider.
Right. I mean, one of the best doctors I've ever met in my life was Derek's cardiologist. And he trusted me. I think that's the other thing, is that they have to listen and they have to trust you.
Or how about they also treat you like a normal person that is smart and that can follow their concepts, even if you're not a cardiologist yourself?
Exactly. Yeah, Derek's cardiologist was great. If I called, he knew that I knew what I was talking about. And they either, nurse's assistant, gave me ideas or he called me right back. It was absolutely remarkable to have a doctor like that. And it's hard to find,
It is really hard to find, yeah.
It is hard to find. And if you're in the hospital, it's even harder. There were different things that happened when we were in the hospital that made me really realize that you got to be on it. And, going back to asking questions and getting answers and listening for the answers, I had a notebook that I used. In the notebook, I wrote down my questions. And it was also in the notebook, when we met with doctors, I would write down what they said so that I remembered and I didn't get it mixed up.
Because there was just so much information.
And he was on a lot of medications. At one point, he was on 10 different medications. So I think that's super important, because otherwise I would have never remembered all the things that different doctors were saying.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you wanted to talk about, in terms of him receiving medical care, that you think would be important for a parent that might have a children with special needs?
I do. I think that there's a piece missing in our healthcare system, a big one. And that piece is having someone who can put everything together for you. if you have a kid that is ill and there are several different doctors seeing them, you have to do it. You have to do that because there isn't anybody there to do it. So, and they're human. They make mistakes. So I remember at one point saying, no, he does not need to have that. I just saw his labs and I knew he wasn't low on sodium. So I wasn't going to give him any more, which was terrible for his heart. But I remember seeing that and saying, no, you're not going to give it to him, you know. Or there was another time which was actually super scary. I got to the hospital and they're like, oh, well, he's fine. He didn't have another stroke. And I looked and I said, wait, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, they didn't call you. And I was like, they did not. So tell me what is happening. And they had given him a new medication for spasms. And he always, not always, but a lot of times his reaction to drugs was not what was expected. So they gave him this medication that was like for an infant, and it just completely drugged him out, just knocked him out. So there he was, and nobody knew what was going on.
And they didn't call you, which means...
Well, they didn't call me, and I can't even go there because I was so mad. But I was sitting there, and he was very, very drugged out. And so his heart rate would drop, and then I would call his name, say, Derek, wake up. And his heart rate would go up, and it'd stay there for a while. A while later, it would go down again. Derek. So this went on for several hours, and I didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what was going on. Then a nurse comes in, and she said, well, I guess I can't give him his medication now. And I'm like, wait, why would you give him medication this time of day? He doesn't have it now. Well, when you go into the hospital, they're going to give the patient their medication when they want to.
Whenever it's convenient for them. Right.
I feel like they figure out what shifts they want to, and whatever. So she's like, no, he's supposed to have it now. Here, come look. So I'm looking at the computer and I'm going through all of his medications, and I stop because I see a medication I've never seen before. And I said, the reason he's like that is because of this medication. He's never had it. And I said, you haven't read when I declined the sodium because his lab work was good, but you did not flag a new medication.
That's a big problem.
Oh, huge in my book.
That's considered malpractice, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
To do that to a patient, to give them a new medication and not...
it should have been flagged.
Well, or to even inform you that they were going to do that.
Right.
Because you were considered his guardian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
And this kind of stuff happens all the time. And anytime I support someone in labor and birth, I'm watching them like a hawk because of this. Like, this is like the origin story of why.
Well, this is what I said. Somebody has to be watching. And, well, it was actually kind of funny because after that, I got whatever I wanted because they knew I was on it.
They knew you caught it and they knew that you were watching. But here's the thing. It's not just about watching. It's about knowing what to look for.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And to know when something is off and be able to spot the problem and be able to tell them, I
think that most parents, they know what medications their kids are on. They know what dose, they know whatever. So, I mean.
But maybe not in the hospital. Like if their child has to be hospitalized for some reason and, they might not know.
Well, if they don't know, then they need to be asking. I mean, they can't give your kid medication without you approving it.
Well, I'm just thinking about like a client of mine that whose baby just left the NICU and the baby needed a medication for its lungs and the husband didn't really know what it was. It was just told to them right when they gave it to the baby and said it was medically necessary and
Right.
that's just what you do. But, he even said to me, I don't know what questions to ask. Like they said it's that the baby needed it, so I'm just going to say yes to it. Not that he shouldn't have said yes to it. Of course he should have said yes
Of
to it.
course, yeah.
But it's just like knowing what it does, how it might affect the child, what are the risks involved if there are any, what are the advantages and the disadvantages, you know what I mean?
Yes. So once that happened, we kind of did whatever we wanted. We took him out of ICU and took him for a walk around the hospital. I mean, he hadn't been out of ICU for like 10 days. So it was good for him to get out. But I
Yeah.
also feel like I was very upset by that. And I came home and I called my sister and said, hey, if something happens to me, you got to get here and figure out what's going on because I don't trust. I mean, human error is human error. It happens. So I'm like, somebody has to watch after me. And then to go even further than that, my heart goes out to parents who English is not their first language.
Oh, yeah.
So asking for a native speaking person, whatever your first language is, to ask for somebody to interpret is super important so you can keep track of it.
And so that you know what's going on. Yeah.
Right.
What about some of the joys, like his camp or back brace burning party? Can you talk
Right.
about
Sure.
these?
So one of the highlights of Derek's year was going for a full week to muscular dystrophy camp. And I have never seen such lovely people in my life because these are all volunteers, all of them doctors. There's always a nurse, but all of the aides were volunteers and they gave up a week to go one-on-one. And these were college kids and some high school kids too. I don't think they stayed the night. I think it was mostly college kids. And these were young adults as well. The one aide Derek had was going to be getting married in 3 weeks. And here he was spending the week. And they were hilarious. They did all kinds of pranks. They did stuff that normal people do, but they never got an opportunity. And as naughty as they could allow those kids to be, they did it. And it was the time of our life. I remember the one where they were actually on the roof of this building and they were throwing water balloons down. It was the funniest thing.
Oh,
But they pranked other cabins and they had card games where kids would get invested in that. And they just did the most wonderful things. Harley Davidson has always been a big supporter of muscular dystrophy. They'd come in on their bikes and they would cook a brat dinner for them. And they had a lot of great, great times. So he ended up having surgery and he had a rod put in his spine. And we did have a brace burning party. We didn't burn the brace, totally toxic, but he didn't have to wear his brace anymore. That was just lovely. All these people showed up and we just had some food and music and a good time. And he loved it. That was a big step for him. So that was fun. And I think he was maybe in 6th grade when we had that and he had the brace put in. Yeah. I feel like you see the worst in life and you see the absolute best in life.
It was also such an intense time. Uncertainty, the stakes were so high.
They were. I think when you have somebody who has a progressive disability, or for that matter, a progressive disease where you just don't know, you are on pins and needles. You are waiting for that other shoe to drop. You try to ignore it. You try to push it away, but it's kind of always there in the back of your mind. And when we did not get you tested, I also had eagle eyes on you to see if you had any symptoms. I feel like with Derek, because it was progressive, we were constantly trying to find solutions solutions of how to take care of him. How do we give him a shower or a bath? How do we get to different places? How do we change that he is having trouble with eating utensils and things like that? So that was our life. And you don't have time. You're constantly looking for ways to have both of your kids have the most normal life.
Yeah. Do you feel like you can share a little bit about the grief after he passed?
I think that I was so focused on trying to build a life with you two. And after he passed away, I was lost. I was lost. There was so much focus on trying to make things normal that I was absolutely lost.
I think I was lost too. And it went from like this just intensity of like, what's going to happen next? Is he going to have another stroke? Like, how long is he going to be in the hospital this time? How much is that going to be? What's the recovery going to be like? Do we need more physical therapy? Like, do we need more hospice care? And then when that all went away and that part was done because he passed away, it was like, what the fuck now? Like, where is the meaning? It was like gone.
Right. Yes. You're just lost when that's taken away. And it takes a long time for it to come back.
Is there anything that anyone could possibly say to comfort a mother that has lost a child? Is there anything that someone has either said or done for you that really made you find comfort and peace?
I'm not sure I know an answer to that, to be honest with you. I don't think I remember really anything that anyone said that was, and I hate to say that, which was comforting. I was so devastated. I was sad. I was devastated. It was a huge piece of my heart. I think that you heal very slowly, and eventually you can see it, that child was a gift to you. You don't have it anymore, but it is a gift. But it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And people mean well and they send lovely cards. It's just so difficult.
Yeah, I think one thing I found comforting in my position, and I was still a child, was just like letting people show up for us. That felt hard, to be honest, because we were so self-sufficient, like the three of us as a unit. So letting people show up, it takes a certain somebody to really just show up and say, no, here, this is for you. We don't have to talk. Like, this is just for you.
Yeah.
I remember little gestures like that from a lot of people, like just dropping by, dropping things off.
And there were also lovely things to celebrate his life that happened. I'm going to say that Derek had the best funeral I've ever been to in my life because it was all about him. It was lovely. And his friends were there.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of nice things that did happen with people. Yeah, showing up. I know a friend of mine showed up and she says, I'm coming. If I do nothing else, I'm going to make you a piece of toast so you eat. I'm like, okay.
Which is kind of what you need because you don't want to eat.
No.
Do you remember anyone doing anything for us to help us with our grief? Because I remember the family that I had babysat for in high school, and even when I'd come home in college, they had two boys that were special needs, and the mom found out what happened. And I'll never forget, she came over with this huge basket of muffins, and she was just like, I'm going to leave these here. These are for you guys. Eat something. Because I don't think at that point we had eaten anything.
No. Well, actually, I remember that ding dong, the doorbell rings, and there is the principal of the school that I worked for on my doorstep. And it just didn't kind of make, it was hard for me to make the connection. And she was just so lovely. She brought us flowers and food. And I have to say, where I worked was incredible. They gave me time off of work. At the very end, when Derek was so sick, at the very end, I took off I think a whole quarter because he had had his stroke and he was a wreck. So then they didn't make me come back right away. And it's that same woman who said to me, I want you to come in every day. Now you can stay 10 minutes or you can work these exams. So they did get a sub for me to take over my classes, but it was so lovely the way that I was taken care of. I don't think there's many places that do that. I felt like between that and my friends, people were trying to take care of me as well. But again, super lonely because I didn't have any friends who had lost a child. So you feel, and I'm sure you did too, that's a lonely place to be because you probably had no friends who experienced the same thing because nobody really knows what that feels like unless they've gone through it.
Yeah, it was definitely alienating and lonely. And I don't know, it also made it hard to like continue on with life the way that you knew it before because it
Right.
just things didn't fit anymore.
Well, that way of life no longer existed.
And I didn't think about like how much my attention and focus was on our family and what was going on. So when he passed away, I didn't really know where to orient myself. You know, like I was like, oh, I'm just going to go to college close to home because there's Derek and like I'm going to help with that. Like I had no real vision of like what the future would look like because we were so focused on like what was happening in the present. And it's quite wild thinking back on it now, just what a different lifetime it feels now. None of what my life is now I would have ever been able to dream up back then. None of it. I would have never moved to California. I would have never traveled as much as I did. Like, yeah.
It does seem surreal in a way that we went through all that.
It was so intense. Like,
It's
so.
all consuming, really, is what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, towards the end, he had several strokes, didn't he?
He had one and they thought maybe he had another, but it turned out that's a whole nother story that they had given him a medication he had never had before. And it literally made him unconscious. So they thought maybe he had had a second one. He didn't. No, really, at the end, it was his heart. It just wasn't doing its job. And his body was starting to shut down. But I don't really think about that anymore. I really think more of like who he was, the things that made him laugh. He was very funny, very smart, very funny.
Yeah. And a really good conversationalist too. Like he wanted to know how things worked.
And he also was very aware of like what was going on in our world. I used to call him the man of the world.
Yeah, he was a humanitarian.
Yes, always for the underdog. Always, always. We also had a lot of people in our lives who were so helpful, so friendly, so giving and loving all along the way, helping me along the way. I'll never forget the one day he came home and he got off the bus and the lift is coming down and he's coming down. He's got something in his arms. And I'm like, well, Derek, what is this? He's like, Mom, the bus driver took me and got me dinner. And the bus driver actually stopped at a restaurant and bought him, I think it was Chinese food. And Derek was so tickled. That man was so lovely. He didn't have to do that. Actually, I think it was kind of illegal, but he didn't have to he didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? But just all along the way, the doctors and the nurses, I have to say, they were lovely. Once he was diagnosed and you get set with your doctors and you get doctors that you really care for and who really are focused on your child, it's just gold.
A lot of Derek's doctors we kept in touch with for a little while, like even after he passed away,
We did.
they would check in.
Yes. Yeah, that was lovely to actually get a phone call or a card saying, we're thinking about you. Yeah.
What do you think was the gift of Derek?
He was very empathetic. So he was able to sympathize and empathize with things that went on in the world. I used to call him kid of the world because he would know about things that were going on in the world. He also was probably the first one to speak up or get pissed off if somebody was not being treated fairly.
Yeah.
Oh, he used to get so mad, Keely, when somebody would treat you poorly. He was always the first one for the underdog. That's what he showed. He lived it.
Yeah, and I just think that like his energy lives on in so many ways, probably way beyond our comprehension, which is amazing.
Yes, it is. My friend Carol was so great. She said, before I got to know Derek and everything that you guys experienced, she said, I never had a clue of what a person in a wheelchair would have to go through. And she said, now I can't unsee that and how it is just needed for so many people.
It's like a whole world that like, unless you're in it, you have no idea.
I agree. And I was the same way. I did not understand all of the ins and outs and the challenges that you have just getting around.
Right. How do you think child rearing has changed since you did your child rearing?
Well, the world has changed, for one thing. I don't feel like it's as safe as it was. I think that sometimes parents can be overprotective.
Tell me a little bit about being a teacher and like observing your students and their relationships with their parents and like communication in general. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was always surprised and very saddened when I learned that very few of my students had a close relationship with their mom.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I feel like with you guys, I kind of pushed you into talking with me. And I don't know what other parents do, to be honest with you.
You said that on one hand, you can count how many students in a class had a close relationship with their mom. Was that always the case in your entire career as a teacher, or do you feel like over time it got progressively worse?
I'm going to be honest with you. I think when I was first teaching, that wasn't something that I was curious about.
Interesting.
And I became more curious about it once I had my own kids and started to get older and talking to kids about my daughter in high school, my daughter in college, and finding out that a lot of them don't really have a close relationship with their mom. Some of them had a closer relationship with their dad, which was, so awesome to see. I mean, anytime a kid has a nice relationship with their parents is, to me, a win. But I do know that parents keep track of their kids a whole lot different now, too. I mean, I'm trying to remember the first time a kid said, yeah, my folks are tracking me on my phone.
That's the norm now?
Oh, absolutely. And it's high school kids, and some even go on to track in college, which to me is like, oh, wow, that would have never happened when I was in high school, or never.
Did you get the feeling that your high school students were being tracked because they weren't trusted, or was it because of safety, or both?
Oh, I probably both. I think the majority of it is parents just want to know what their kids are doing, and that they're safe. I'm just going to say I have a problem with that, because are they ever on their own, and can they handle that? Okay, now I'm going to ask you, what would you have thought if I tracked you on your phone?
I think if you wanted to track me on my phone, that you didn't trust me. And if a parent doesn't trust their kid, that does kind of seem like a reason. I'm not saying that that's right,
Yeah.
but it seems like maybe a reason why someone would do that. But I would think that on some level, you weren't trusting me if you were tracking me. Unless you explicitly said, like, we live in a dangerous area, so I need to do this. But that wasn't the case for us. So,
Right.
But like maybe somewhere else, that's a real valid concern. And like, I know some kids take public transportation to get to school.
I feel like this is something different because you have the phone. So if anything were to happen, you could call. this is different. And I think parents just want to know what their kids are up to. I don't think it's always about trust. I think they just can't stand not knowing what their kids are doing.
So parents want to know what their kids are up to. Do you think that's because they're not talking to their kids, or that kids are not talking to their parents, so they feel like they have to track them and spy on them to know what they're up to? Because we were a household that talked, so like you kind of knew what we were up to. Sure, we had
Right.
our own stuff going on, but I also don't think either me or Derek ever showed you any indication that we were doing anything bad.
And you were very funny because you used that to your advantage. Come on, Mom. When have I ever given you a reason not to trust me? Then it's like, okay, you can do it.
Well, yeah, because I was traveling on my own at like 16. I was going to
Yeah.
Europe on my own at 16. And looking
Yeah.
back now, I'm like, the trust you had for me, I mean, it's pretty amazing, like looking back, because I don't know if I would have done the same for my child, even though I was very responsible. And maybe it's just that the world is different now.
But it wasn't easy. I mean, it wasn't, oh, bye. It was, oh, bye. Every finger, my toes, everything is crossed. I'm praying that you have, safe journey. And I'm not going to lie, it was hard to see you walk away and travel overseas.
But we also had an understanding that I would be in communication with you, because I think that would have really been not cool of me to just like say bye and not let you know that I
Right.
made it somewhere.
That was a tough thing.
Maybe you could talk about having an empty nest and that transition.
The story I love to tell is when you were a junior and you said, oh, Mom, we have to start talking about college. And I said, no, I'm not going to talk to you about it. And you said, Mom, you have to talk to me about it. I'm like, no, you have to give me at least 3 weeks to wrap my brain around you leaving. And you were great. You didn't say anything for 3 weeks, a month, and then we started working on it. It's very hard to have an empty nest at first. It's quiet. The energy is out of the house. I missed you.
It's got to be so hard that you like birthed this thing and
Yeah.
spent so much time just protecting it and growing it and making sure it's healthy and alive. And now all of a sudden it's like, bye.
And yeah, but watching you grow and make the choices that you make and asking you questions so that, you are making the right choices. But it's like, oh gosh, there she goes. I think I had things on to make noise in the house, like a TV or music. I played a lot of music. Yeah, it was hard. Not going to lie.
What would you say to someone that's on the verge of being an empty nester?
Get a dog. I'm teasing, sort of. It's also very exciting to see you go off and see the things that you do. And, your joy is my joy. When you figure something out, or you do well in a class, or you meet new friends, or you experience something new, that's my joy as well. I mean, that's the fun part, is to talk about, the great things that you experience and you go through. I think that's my joy too. It is very joyful to see a strong young woman off on her own, tackling, New York. Goodbye. I think as parents, it's our joy too, to see you thrive. And
What about your style of parenting? What do you think worked in terms of how me and Derek just talking to each other and having conversation? Because conversation was really a huge part of how you parented. Do you have any
Yes.
thoughts on that?
I feel like my style was 100% fly by the seat of your pants, because you never knew what was coming. And you had to stay flexible so that if something cool happened, we went for it. Or if we needed to change something, you had to be cool enough to just change it and not give it a second thought. But I think communication was one of the hugest ones. I look back and I think our dinners together were amazing. My philosophy is I really wanted to know who my kids were. And the best way to do that is to just throw out stuff. So when dinner would start, I would say, so what happened today? And if somebody said nothing, then I made a little buzzing sound. Wrong answer. What else? Give me another answer. And I didn't really care what we talked about as long as we were talking. We had a lot of subjects come up in our talks. It wasn't just what went on in the playground. We talked about faith and religion. We talked about what was going on in the world. We talked about politics. We talked about individual experiences that happened. But I think that the best way is to just keep the conversation going. And I didn't want to tell you stuff. I wanted you to come to your own decision about certain things. My biggest way to get around that is you'd ask me a question and I would just kind of look off into the distance and I'd come back and say, well, I don't know. What do you think? And then off we go. Now you're telling me what you think. And then as a parent, I could take that conversation in different directions if I needed to or wanted to, which was nice.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when I came up to you and told you I wasn't sure I believed in any God?
Oh my God. Well, let's just go back, Keely, sitting on the couch, reading books at night, and you saying, Mama, I think I want to be Jewish and Christian. And we talked about why. And then I said, okay, you can. But then I think it was in high school, that was a great conversation. And it was a conversation. And mind you, I taught at a Catholic high school. And so I think it was very brave and bold of you to say, I don't know if I believe in God. You also went to Catholic school. So being in a Catholic school with other students who knew all the answers to all the questions that they were asked about the ceremony of Catholicism. But that didn't mean that they had it together any more than you did, or it didn't mean that they actually had a strong belief. It just meant that they could answer questions that they were taught.
Do you remember what you said to me when I said, I don't know if I believe in God?
This is what I remember. I remember saying that you are exactly where you need to be and you should be, that you were ahead of the game because you were even thinking about it, questioning, asking questions, learning.
The most important thing you said to me was, I love you all the same.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because sometimes love is contingent upon if you believe something, and that wasn't the case in our family. You know, you didn't impose certain beliefs on us. You really did give us the space to decide on our own. And Derek was extremely spiritual, extremely spiritual for, you know, a young man.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't say that he was so like religious, organized religion. Neither one of you were. But to me, spirituality is on a bigger, higher level. It's answering what is right, what is good, what is kind, what is giving. Definitely was a priority, I think.
Did your spirituality change at all after Derek passed, and how?
I think, yes. I think that it took me a while. I think if any point that we talked about anger, that's what it was.
Angry at God.
Yeah. How could you take him?
Or how could you let someone suffer like that for so long?
And trying to find their purpose.
So how did you make sense of it?
So this is going back to when I wrote the eulogy. Even though in every part of our life we were challenged, for sure. But every step of the way, we were shown love and compassion from all the people that were in our lives. It's not so much, and I wrote this, it's not so much about getting the answers to those questions. It's just believing that love is always the answer. And we were shown love all along the way.
Yeah. It's so profound and so beautiful. And we really did make lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, we did. And, you know, I'm sitting here bawling, but the fact of the matter is, I don't really anymore cry at things that are tough and difficult and ugly. My tears are usually over beauty.
Yeah, same.
And all the people who were involved in our lives, I mean, I just can't even tell you, it's overwhelming how much kindness and love we were shown.
Also, I'm just like reflecting on like just how many lives Derek touched, like beyond my comprehension,
Right.
and how that love is still alive and very
Right.
strong in all of us.
I agree.
Yeah, it's really hard because like loss and grief, like that really is what binds us together.
It does, especially when you can dig even deeper and find the beauty. That's really what binds us.
Yeah. So, what beauty today reminds you of Derek?
Wow, that's a crazy question. You do. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I think back, like, Keely, you and I, we did everything together.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So I can't think of Derek ever without thinking about you and the time that we spent together.
Do you think that my role as a doula has anything to do with how we took care of Derek?
Yeah, I do. And I also think that the focus that you give your clients is the same kind of focus that we gave Derek, where we are looking at the whole person. Because all of your clients are different, you are able to support them all in different ways. You're very fluid and flexible with the way that you deal with your patients and the way you listen to them and the way that you try to understand them in their lives. I think absolutely it makes a difference.
Thank you for saying that. And I also think that I don't think I would be able to do my job effectively if it wasn't for Derek. It's just not a skill that I think I would have known or been able to develop as, I shouldn't say easily because it wasn't easy, but it's a skill that I learned through my life experience, for better or worse.
You were his caregiver as well, because there were so many times where I was working and you were taking care of him.
Yeah, that's right. So that beauty and that love is now being handed down to my clients from my
Yes,
experience with working
I
with
agree.
Derek, which is
Yep.
pretty amazing if you think about it.
And it continues, right?
It continues.
Did you ever have moments like looking at me or Derek and think like, oh wow, that trait is from me?
I can think of things where I can say, oh, geez, they got that from their dad. And I'm sure your dad can probably turn around and say, oh, they got that from their mom, you know.
Yeah.
Not really. I really felt like you guys were your own little people, both very different. I was super lucky to have these two people.
Well, it's funny too because with clients having a second baby or a third baby, they're only comparing this new baby in relation to the other child they may have had. And it's just funny how, like, you start having more than one kid, you realize every child is their own universe.
Yes.
It's almost a guarantee they will be nothing alike.
Yep, exactly. You know, and you guys fussed just like any other kids, but boy, you watched out for each other. Because I remember you used to get really mad at people when they were not good with Derek.
Right. Totally.
Well, I want to ask, what do you think you got from me? The tables have turned.
I think I have somehow developed a very strong internal compass of discernment, which is something I talk a lot about with my clients. Really listening to that tiny little voice that, if I use logic or reason, gets even quieter or quieter, and just getting more comfortable with the fact that while logic and reason are important things, my native tongue is intuition and is coming from like this inner knowing. And I think that I got that from you. Your way of mothering was just like letting us figure it out. I mean, as long as we're not like hurting each other or like
Right.
hurting ourselves, it was like, I don't know, you go try it out. Tell me what you think.
Yeah.
And if you haven't figured it out yet, just keep trying and try something else. And maybe something will come to you. And it's okay if you don't know everything. I guess it was just what you gave me was permission to not know everything. And to be okay with a little bit of discomfort, that is just part of growing, but also being human. Like, there's a lot of dissonance, and I think that I learned that lesson real fast as a kid with a sibling that was high needs.
Right. Resilience, maybe.
Resilience, and also
Yeah.
like the art of conversation and banter. And it wasn't like we all had to agree on the same thing. We just had to have respect towards each
Right.
other's opinions. And I think that that's missing a lot, especially now. It's like we've lost out on the ability to conflict with each other in a respectful way.
Right.
And that was never a thing in our house. It was like people were entitled to have opinions. It just had to be respectful.
Right.
And I think there was a lot of love in our home.
I agree.
I want to ask you just a few more questions. So you were a teacher for how many years?
31 years.
And you taught dance.
Yep. Through fine arts. Yes.
Yeah, what is it about dance that is so meaningful to you?
I think that in dance, you move your body in a much different way than anything else. Any pedestrian movement, any sports movement, you're moving it totally different. And I think the thing I love the best about dance is that there's unlimited ways to move and combine. And I loved choreographing. So finding different patterns and investigating different ideas, that to me was, I think the best was really finding these concepts, these ideas, and investigating and seeing how movement can play a role and playing around, really. I mean, the most fun I had was when I was goofing around with my students and we were exploring different things and laughing and having a great time.
Well, and we danced a lot at home too.
We did. I broke my toe that one time. Do you remember?
God, I can't believe I'm just now making this connection, but just the freedom that dance gives and the freedom of expression and how intuitive it is. It's really interesting when you partner that with Derek and how restrictive
Right.
his mobility was and his movements were. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, and how specific certain things were for him when it came to movement. Like in order to transfer him or whatever, there were specific things and steps that you needed to take for that. And, flying around the family room, dancing to crazy rock and roll music was fabulous. I mean, it was fun. It was exciting. Just let loose. It didn't matter what we looked like. We were just having fun.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being able to chat about some of this. We haven't really chatted about some of this in a while, so that was special.
It's been a while. Yeah, I don't think I got all my ages right, but that's okay.
It's okay. So do you have any imparting wisdom you want to share with any mother with young children, just beginning the journey of parenthood and trying to figure out what life is about with this new?
Right. I would say the one thing, no matter who your kids are, is you just have to talk. Not talking at them, but having conversations, I think for me was one of the most important things because I knew where you guys were coming from. And I think that in my experience as a high school teacher, kids that were closest to the parents were kids that could have conversations with their parents. Mm. And as a parent, you have to provide that it's safe to talk and you can say and ask whatever you want. You just have to be respectful.
I love that. And I love you. Thank you for your time.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being willing to close out the podcast season with me.
Oh my gosh. I'm so proud of you. I just love you, all the different podcasts you've done.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family and stay tuned for the next episode.